If Officer Luke Carter had driven by just 10 seconds earlier, the story might have been lost to silence. Ravenwood, Missouri was wrapped in its usual darkness that night. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that made the skin prickle. Wind slithered through brittle oak trees on the edge of town, the kind of town most people forgot the moment they left. Luke had learned to live with that silence. After 12 years on the force, it was routine, almost comforting. But Apollo was different. Barely 2 years old, the department's youngest K9 was already breaking every rule of routine. A German shepherd with too much fire in his chest and instincts sharper than the blade of a knife. Loyal, fearless, unpredictable. Luke respected him, but trust that was harder. Trust was a currency Luke hadn't spent in a long time. The patrol was supposed to be nothing. A slow loop past empty warehouses, shuttered businesses, and forgotten lots. One hand on the wheel, the other on a half-warm thermos. Luke yawned. Then Apollo growled. It started low, a tremor from deep in his chest. Then it split the silence, sharp and vicious, making Luke spill coffee across his lap. The dog lunged toward the windshield, body rigid, eyes burning at something hidden in the dark. "What is it, buddy? A raccoon?" Luke slowed the cruiser, but the edge in Apollo's bark told him this wasn't about raccoons. Between a dead tire shop and a burned-out pharmacy, Luke saw it. An ambulance, abandoned. Its paint sun-bleached, its lights cracked, half swallowed by weeds. But something about it didn't fit. That thing hadn't been there yesterday. Luke eased to the curb. Apollo was already clawing at the door, frantic, desperate. Leash clipped, paws hit the ground, Apollo charged straight to the ambulance, barking wild at its back doors. Luke's gut tightened. The closer he came, the heavier the air felt. The smell hit first sour, chemical, suffocating. Mold, bleach, something worse. His flashlight beam caught torn cushions, a dangling IV bag, the stripped remains of a gurney, and there, in the middle of the floor, a small pink tennis shoe. Luke's breath froze. His fingers curled tighter around the light. "Not tonight," he whispered, stepping back. But Apollo wouldn't let go, scratching at a steel plate bolted into the floor, fresh metal where rust should have been. Something was hidden there, something recent. When backup rolled in 20 minutes later, Sergeant Peter dismissed it all. "Junkie squatters," he muttered, shaking his head. But Apollo kept barking, as if he knew the earth itself was lying. Luke didn't argue. He took photos. Every angle, every detail. Hours later, back at the station, Apollo was still restless, pacing the kennel like his paws were burning. Luke sat down beside him, rubbing behind his ears. "You're not letting this go, huh?" Apollo laid his head on Luke's lap, eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Luke sighed. "All right then. First light, we go back." But before dawn ever touched Ravenwood, a call crackled through the radio. That same ambulance? Gone. Vanished into the night. Hey, if you believe dogs like Apollo are more than just animals, if you believe they're heroes, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, for more true stories that show just how powerful one loyal dog can be. At dawn, Luke returned to the ambulance with a crowbar, a thermos, and no official orders. He pried open the floor, the plate, hands shaking slightly as he popped the last bolt. What he found underneath wasn't deep, but it didn't need to be. Inside was a narrow-lined compartment, barely big enough for a person to lie down. There were scratched plastic walls, a bottle of stale water, and a crumpled bag of off-brand potato chips. He found another shoe, this one blue, and a soft toy, a plush dinosaur frayed and dirty. Luke dropped it like it burned him. He called it in again, this time directly to the FBI's regional contact. By noon, the lot was swarming. Agent Candace Tren, FBI, stood beside Luke with her arms crossed. "We've seen this before," she said. "Ambulances, delivery vans, old food trucks, all retrofitted, all abandoned along trucking routes." "Why here?" Luke asked. She turned to face him. "Because no one's watching here." Apollo lay beside them, finally calm, panting softly, but his ears still twitched, toward the ambulance every few seconds. "You think this was a transfer point?" Luke asked. Tran nodded. "Definitely. And if it lines up with what we're tracking, we're not just dealing with a smuggling ring." She pulled out her phone and showed Luke a blurry surveillance photo. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, taken in Arkansas. It showed the same ambulance parked outside a gas station with what looked like a child's hand pressed against the window. Luke felt the breath leave his lungs. "They're using emergency vehicles," TR said, "to move kids quietly across state lines." "No. One questions ambulances." Luke looked down at Apollo, who had saved more than just his partner's pride tonight. He had uncovered the tip of something far darker, and it wasn't over. Not even close. The worst part wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. By the time the forensic team had finished tearing apart the ambulance, Luke Carter had counted every single bolt, seam, and hidden compartment twice. Apollo paced behind him like a metronome, measured, alert, unsettled. Agent Tran hadn't said much. She watched. She took notes. Then, she motioned to one of the texts. "Get the dogs on the other vehicles along the trucking corridor," she said. "If this one was active recently, the others might still have residue." Luke leaned against the hood of his cruiser, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, but it couldn't quite warm the air or the mood. "So, no kids?" he finally asked. Tran shook her head. "Not today, but someone used this as a transport cell. Look at the wear patterns on the metal, the scratched walls. We found hair samples, smeared fingerprints too small. To be adult. How old? Maybe 6 or 7. Luke exhaled, so they were alive. "And in there," Tran turned to him, "and recently the ambulance was towed to a federal impound lot within the hour." Luke wasn't assigned to the case officially, but Tran didn't stop him from helping. "You found it," she said. "We'd be stupid not to have you and Apollo stay close." That afternoon, they reviewed photos, hundreds of them. Apollo stayed curled beneath Luke's desk at the precinct, ears twitching at every unusual sound. One image made Luke freeze. It was a wide shot of the ambulance floor. Steel scratched, stained, and just barely visible in the blow. In the corner, carved faintly with a sharp object or a nail, were 5 letters. "Help, M." Luke leaned closer. "Who's M?" he muttered. By the next morning, the FBI's digital team had traced the vehicle back to a defunct ambulance company out of Nashville. The owner claimed he sold the vehicle 3 years ago to an unnamed buyer on Craigslist. No bill of sale, no records, no nothing. Classic. But Tran had better luck with the fingerprints. Partial matches flagged from a missing persons report out of Little Rock, Arkansas. A girl named Madison R., age 7, gone 3 weeks, taken while walking home from school. No ransom, no witnesses, just gone. Luke blinked hard at the photo of the girl. Blonde, gap-toothed smile, the kind of kid who made up songs for her stuffed animals and called every dog she met Mr. Wiggles. He looked down at Apollo, who tilted his head and let out a low whine. Luke whispered, "We've got to find her." That afternoon, Tran laid out a map on the conference table. Dozens of small red pins stretched across 5 states. The route was random. It followed major trucking lines, rest stops, and industrial zones just outside law enforcement jurisdiction. "These guys are smart," Tran said. "They know how to vanish in plain sight. They use vehicles nobody stops. They rotate them, burn them, repaint them." Luke stared at the web of pins. "You said another ambulance was found outside Springfield last month?" Tran nodded. "Empty, but fresh footprints. Nearby, child-sized. Same kind of evidence. Similar setup. What about the vents? Same configuration. Retrofit floor plate. Barely visible unless you know what you're looking for." Luke traced the route with his finger. "If they're moving east to west, they'd be coming through this stretch next." Tran raised an eyebrow. "That's your district." Luke nodded. "That's our shot. 2 nights. Later, Luke and Apollo were parked outside an old grain mill that had been converted into a warehouse. The lot backed up to the highway, perfect for trucks to pull in and out without being noticed. They waited in silence. Midnight, then 1, then 2. At 2:43 a.m., headlights. A white van crept into the lot, taillights dim, engine barely audible. It backed up to the side of the warehouse and cut the engine. No markings, no plates. Luke whispered, "Bingo." He radioed it in low and tight. "Unit 12, possible suspect vehicle at the old mill lot. Request silent backup." No sirens, but Apollo was already on edge, ears high, body trembling with restrained energy. Luke could tell he smelled something alive. He watched through those binoculars. A man got out of the van, popped the back doors, and rolled out what looked like a covered gurney. Too fast, too casual. He disappeared inside the side door of the building. 10 minutes passed. Then a second man appeared, taller in a faded paramedic uniform. He opened the van's driver door and checked his phone, smoked a cigarette. Luke's fingers curled around the steering wheel. And then Apollo whined, low, insistent, focused. Luke looked at him. "You sure?" Apollo whined again, then barked, soft but sharp. Luke made his decision. "Let's Move. They crept from the cruiser, boots crunching lightly on gravel. Apollo stayed at heel, every step calculated, nose twitching like radar. They slipped along the side wall of the building, just under the shadows cast by the roof's overhang. Luke raised his flashlight, thumb on the strobe trigger, other hand on his Glock. As they neared the back of the van, Apollo pulled hard left toward the vehicle, barking sharply once. Luke froze. He opened the rear doors. It was empty at first glance, but the floor was uneven. He crouched, hands gliding over the rubber mat, his fingers caught on a loose edge. He peeled it back. Another hatch. Same size, same bolts. This one, newer, cleaner. Apollo began barking louder now, tail rigid, eyes locked. Luke reached for the latch. A hand grabbed his shoulder. He spun, weapon raised. But it was Agent Tran, followed by two more. Officers. "We got your call," she whispered. "You good?" Luke pointed at the hatch. "They're in there." "I know." Tron nodded once. "Open it." He did. Inside were 3 children, 2 girls, 1 boy, crammed together, duct tape over their mouths, wrists zip-tied, eyes wide, tear-streaked faces pale from lack of air. Apollo immediately stopped barking. He sat, tail wagging slowly, ears soft, head tilting side to side, as if trying to comfort them without a word. Luke holstered his weapon and reached in carefully, cutting the ties one by one. Tren radioed for EMTs. One of the girls, maybe 5 or 6, clutched Luke's arm. She whispered hoarsely. He said we were going on a trip." Luke's voice cracked. "You're safe now, I promise." She looked at Apollo. "Is he our dog now?" Luke smiled, barely holding it together. "He's everyone's dog, sweetheart." The suspects were arrested on sight. One tried to run and got tackled by Tran. The other surrendered without a fight, just stood there silent, eyes blank. Inside the warehouse, agents found mattresses, blankets, food wrappers, and multiple license plate frames from different states. It wasn't just a local operation. This was a distribution point, and they had just kicked down its door. By sunrise, the children were at the hospital, being checked and reunited with family. The youngest wouldn't let go of Apollo's vest until a nurse gave her a teddy bear. Luke stood in the hallway, staring through the glass. Tran walked up beside him. "You did good." He shook his head. "Apollo did good. I just followed him." Trina smiled. "That's what a good partner does." Luke crouched and scratched Apollo behind the ears. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. Apollo licked his face in reply, and for the first time in years, Luke didn't feel alone. The warehouse was dark. Again, sealed off, and silent. But in Luke Carter's mind, it wouldn't shut up. Every corner still echoed with the muffled cries of those kids, the ones they rescued, the ones who might still be out there. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to know if you find 3, there were more before them, and there'd be more after. Apollo sat in the passenger seat of the cruiser, chin resting on the console. His eyes were open, but his body was still watching, waiting. "You think they missed something?" Luke asked, his voice low. "So do I." He turned the key. They were going back. Technically, the building was under FBI jurisdiction now, but Luke had a key card from the city fire department and a favor owed from a guy who ran maintenance. 20 minutes later, he and Apollo slipped through the side door and into the cold concrete interior. The smell hit him first, bleach and rust, but under that, something else. Faint, musky, like damp, plastic. He turned on his flashlight. The CS were gone, evidence taken, but the outlines still remained. Dark scuff marks where mattresses had been dragged. A crushed juice box in the corner. Hand-drawn stick figures still etched into the drywall in crayon. Smudged, but visible. Then Apollo growled. Luke swung the beam toward the far wall. There, behind a rusted filing cabinet, someone pushed aside, was a door. Thin, wooden, unlocked. Apollo pawed at it once, then sat ears high. Luke opened it slowly. Inside was a narrow storage room. Empty shelves lined the walls, but a desk stood at the center, and above it, pinned to a corkboard, was a map. Luke stepped closer, careful not to disturb anything. The map covered half the country, interstate corridors, railroads, warehouse hubs. But what caught his breath was what was written on it. Dozens of names, just first. Names, all in childlike handwriting. Under each name, a number. Most had been crossed out in red marker. Then his eyes landed on one name that hadn't been crossed out. Madison. And next to it, 3 days. He snapped photos of the entire board, every detail, every corner. He knew what this was. A schedule, a countdown, a cycle. He pulled out his phone and called Tran. "You need to get down here now and bring every field agent you've got." Back at the precinct, Luke uploaded the photos and pasted as Apollo watched from his unusual spot under the desk. 3 days. That meant Madison, who they hadn't found, was due to be moved in 3 days, if she hadn't been already. Luke closed his eyes and remembered the carved message in the ambulance. "Help him." It wasn't a note. It was a signature. When Agent Tran arrived, she didn't waste time. "This isn't just a trafficking operation," she said, scrolling through the images. "This is a supply chain," Luke nodded. "A system organized like logistics for a warehouse, except the product is children." Tran rubbed her temples. "Some of these names, we've seen them before. Missing reports, Amber Alerts, but the local jurisdictions never connected the dots until now." She looked at him. "You want in?" "I was never out." The task force set up inside a borrowed wing of the precinct. FBI, state police, DHS, and Luke. Still technically local, but nobody argued anymore. Apollo became the unofficial mascot. The dog with the nose, they called him. But Luke knew it was more than that. Apollo wasn't just sniffing. He was sensing, feeling, something Luke couldn't see. While Tran coordinated the digital sweep, Luke focused on the map. Every route, every location, every number. He started pinning them physically on a new corkboard, one push pin at a time. Red for confirmed recoveries, blue for known drop points, yellow for possible leads. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Every 11 days, new movement. Every third vehicle used was an ambulance. Every fourth location was near a hospital or storage facility recently shut down. And in between, abandoned farms, old gas stations, roadside motel. 2 days in, just past midnight, Luke was poring over satellite images when Tran walked in, holding her phone. "We got a break." "What kind?" "A flagged van." "Springfield PD. Picked up a tip. Man matching one of our suspects tried to rent a storage unit using fake EMT credentials." Luke stood. "Where?" "Just outside Branson." "But here's the kicker. When they ran the unit number through the database, it pinged against a second name on our map." She held up her phone, a name highlighted in blue. "Jace." Luke grabbed his keys. "I'll take Apollo." The drive was tense. Fog rolled in thick across the roads, headlights cutting through in a narrow cone. Apollo stayed upright the whole time, ears swiveling, alert. The storage facility sat along a gravel road, flanked by farmland, and one broken lamppost flickering like it hadn't worked. Right in years. A single cruiser waited out front. 2 local deputies stepped aside as Luke showed his badge. "You sure about this?" one asked. "We peeked in the unit. Just a cot and a propane heater. Nothing illegal." Luke nodded toward Apollo. "Let's see what he says." The storage unit smelled like dust and gasoline. It was cold inside, too cold for an unheated building. Apollo didn't react at first. Then halfway in, he froze. Low growl, head down, tail stiff. He moved to the back wall and started sniffing along the floor. Then he stopped, scratched twice. Luke knelt, pulling his flashlight from his belt. At first glance, the floor looked solid, but there was a seam, faint, barely visible. He pried at it. It gave, and beneath was another hatch. The officers helped lift it, underneath a shallow compartment. Wooden framing insulated with old blankets and styrofoam. It was empty, but on the floor was a notebook, torn pages, drawings, and taped to the inside of the lid. A photograph. Madison. Luke's chest tightened. She was alive, recently, smiling. In the photo, she was holding a stuffed animal and standing beside a man in a hospital gown. The timestamp was 2 days ago. Luke looked at Tran. "She's not gone yet." That night, Luke sat outside the station with Apollo, the cold air sharp against his face. He held the photo in his hand, the edges damp from sweat. "We're getting close, boy," he said. "They're slipping." Apollo gave a quiet bark, then laid his head against Luke's knee. For the first time in a long while, Luke didn't feel like he was chasing ghosts. He felt like he was closing in, and this time they were going to win. Luke. Carter wasn't sleeping anymore. He tried. God knows he tried. But every time his head hit the pillow, his brain kept replaying that photo of Madison, smiling, unaware, holding a teddy bear, in front of a man with dead eyes. It wasn't just about solving a case anymore. This had become personal. He was hunting ghosts in his waking hours. But Apollo was hunting something real. It was early morning when the call came in. Tran's voice was sharper than usual. "We got something. A flag credit. The card was used last night at a gas station just south of Jefferson City. The name matches a burner ID tied to the Pless van owner from the Branson site." Luke was already lacing up his boots. What was purchased? Tran didn't hesitate. Fuel, energy, drinks, and 3 bags of jelly beans. Luke blinked. Jelly beans? Yeah, weird, right? But here's the kicker. One of Madison's teachers said she used to trade jelly beans at recess. Claimed she could taste the color just by smell. Luke froze. She's alive. We think so. But if they're moving again, this might be the last window. Apollo jumped into the cruiser before Luke even opened the back door fully. His energy was different now. Focused, driven, almost like he could feel the urgency pulsing from Luke's chest. They hit the road hard. The gas station surveillance footage wasn't much. A blurry figure in a hoodie, barely looking at the clerk, paying cash, and walking out. But something about the van caught Luke's eye. Not the shape or the color, the rust pattern on the rear bumper. He'd seen it before, months ago, on a tip that turned cold. A van parked outside a shuttered community hospital in Kansas City. The vehicle had vanished before they could track it. Luke turned to Tran. "I think I know where they're headed." 2 hours later, they arrived at the old Crestview Medical Center. A facility shut down during the pandemic and never reopened. Chain-link fencing surrounded the building, and a red "No trespassing" sign flapped in the breeze. But the lock on the front gate freshly cut. Luke stepped out of the cruiser and opened Apollo's door. The dog bounded out and immediately lowered his head, nose twitching furiously. Luke gave the command, "Find." Apollo moved with precision, weaving through tall grass, then along the cracked sidewalk toward the side entrance. He stopped, sat, wed. Luke saw the faintest smudge on the door knob, grime disturbed by a gloved hand. They were inside. Tran's tactical team swept the building's perimeter. Luke and Apollo took point on the west wing. Once a pediatric wing, now stripped of equipment, but still heavy with that sterile hospital scent. "Keep it tight," Luke whispered, a hand on his sidearm. "We're not losing her." Apollo moved ahead, ears up, tail low, his body language tight. They passed empty cribs, faded murals of cartoon animals, and an overturned wheelchair. At the far end of the hallway was a half-open door, faint light spilling through. Apollo stopped and growled. Luke motioned to Tran, then approached the door with slow, measured steps. He pushed it open. Inside was a makeshift living space, a mattress on the floor, an empty cereal box, a battery-powered lantern, and a backpack. Luke moved to the bag. Inside were kid clothes, a pair of socks with unicorns on them, and a drawing. He held it up. A little girl, a tall man, and a dog with a badge on its vest. Luke's throat tightened. She remembers, clear. Someone called from down the hall, but Apollo was still sniffing the far corner. He barked once sharply, then began pawing at the floor near a loose vent cover. Luke knelt and pried it open. Tucked inside was a small sock, dirty, faded pink. Luke held it to Apollo's nose. The dog stiffened, then bolted out the door. They followed Apollo through corridors and stairwells, winding into the lower levels of the hospital. Every turn brought them deeper underground, where the air grew colder and the light dimmer. Finally, Apollo stopped in front of a metal door marked supply. Luke tried the handle. Locked. Tran stepped forward. Stand back. One swift kick, and the door flew open. Inside were rows of dusty cabinets, old bed sheets, and boxes of expired medication. But in the back, huddled near a wall, was a little girl, blonde hair, dirty cheeks, clutching a crumpled teddy bear. Madison. Luke holstered his weapon and knelt. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Luke. This is Apollo." Apollo sat, tongue out, tail wagging gently. Madison blinked, then smiled, weak but real. "You're real. We're real. And you're safe. Now." She stood slowly, one foot limping. "They left me and said they'd come back after dark, but they didn't." Tran stepped forward, radioing for medics. Luke lifted Madison into his arms. "You're going home, kiddo." She looked down at Apollo. "He's even bigger than I drew." Luke laughed softly. "He's a lot of things." Back at the precinct, the mood was electric. News had already leaked that Madison had been found. The media circled like vultures, but Tran handled the press. Luke stayed back. He sat outside the K9 training yard with Apollo, tossing him a tennis ball and watching him leap through the air. "You found her," he said again. Apollo dropped the ball and barked once, proud. Inside the station, Madison was being reunited with her aunt. Laughter, tears, relief. But Luke couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't over. Not yet. Later that evening, Tran joined him at the picnic table behind the precinct. "We got another lead," she said, setting her phone on the table. "The guy in the photo, with Madison, facial match came back. Marco Valls, suspected child smuggler, ties to international networks. Colombian passport. He slipped out of Missouri 2 nights ago." Luke clenched his jaw. "Where to?" "Texas border. Then, maybe Mexico." Luke nodded. "We'll find him." Tran raised an eyebrow. "We?" Luke smirked. "You're not leaving me and Apollo behind now, are you?" She smiled. "Wouldn't dare." That night, Luke returned home for the first time in days. He stood in the doorway of his small house, flicked on the lights inside. Apollo padded in behind him, tail wagging. Luke dropped his gear on the kitchen counter, then looked around. He thought of Madison's drawing, the dog in the badge, vest, the man beside him. She hadn't just remembered them. She'd believed in them. And that belief, that saved her life. He knelt beside Apollo and pulled him into a hug. "You're not just my partner," he whispered. "You're a damn miracle." Apollo licked his cheek, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Luke Carter smiled. The sun was still low on the horizon when Luke Carter stood at the state line, boots planted just outside a rural gas station near Laredo, Texas. Wind carried dust across the cracked asphalt. A billboard overhead advertised cold beer and tacos, 24/7, though the building it belonged to had long since shuttered. Apollo sniffed the air, tail still, nose twitching. He was picking something up. Luke didn't need him to speak. He could tell they were close. 2 days earlier, Agent Tran had confirmed it. Marco Vez, the man photographed with Madison, had crossed into Texas just before the feds issued the nationwide alert. They'd missed him by a few hours, enough time for him to vanish into the maze of secondary roads, safe houses, and sympathetic locals with no reason to trust law enforcement. But there was one thing they had going for them. Apollo had his scent from Madison's sock and from a baseball cap found at Crestview Medical Center, sweat-stained and full of DNA. And Apollo, he didn't forget a scent. They started in a small border town where ICE had recently raided an abandoned farmhouse. Locals claimed they'd seen children taken out in unmarked vans. No markings, no lights, just quiet shadows moving before dawn. Luke crouched beside Apollo on the dusty road, held out the baseball cap and whispered, "Find." Apollo barked once, trotted toward a barbed wire fence, and kept going, nose down, focused, determined. 10 minutes in, he led them to a collapsed water tower on the edge of a pecan orchard. Buried beneath branches was an old black duffel bag. Inside energy bars, kid-sized socks, cough syrup, and a burner phone. Dead, but still holding one saved photo. Luke's hands trembled as he opened the image. 3 kids sitting in the back of what looked like a school bus with blacked-out windows. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was Marco's tattooed hand holding the camera. Agent Tran arrived 3 hours later in a black Suburban, coffee in hand, eyes sharp. "We think he's using the bus as a decoy," she said. "A moving transport unit changes routes, constantly, keeps kids in motion, away from detection. If it's the same one flagged in Arizona last year, it's got an aftermarket engine and swapped plates. Where would he be now?" Luke asked. Tron exhaled. "That depends, but we just got a ping, a state trooper in. Zapata saw a yellow bus parked behind an abandoned carnival site. Said it didn't look right, reported it an hour ago. By the time backup arrived, it was gone." Luke looked at Apollo. "He'll find it." Tran nodded and saddled up. The old carnival ground looked like something out of a ghost story. Rusted Ferris wheel, collapsed cotton candy stands, and an old ticket booth, windows broken, and sun-bleached flyers flapping like ghosts. Apollo pulled Luke toward a path, behind the grounds where faded tire tracks veered off the dirt and into a grove of mesquite trees. At the end of the trail, just before the terrain turned rocky, they found oil drips still, fresh. Luke crouched. They were here. Tran radioed it in. "Notify border checkpoints. We're not letting a school bus just disappear." But Luke wasn't ready to wait on red tape. He pulled Apollo close. "Let's go. Wherever they went, you're our best shot." Apollo barked once, low, controlled. They were back in this cruiser, wheels spitting, gravel, chasing shadows. Hours passed. Town after town, back roads and dead ends. But Luke never turned the engine off. He kept looping, kept watching Apollo's body language. Then, the rundown truck stop outside Loya, Apollo suddenly sat up in the back seat, ears forward, growling. Luke slammed the brakes. A yellow school bus was parked near the edge of the lot, tucked behind a semi-truck trailer. From a distance, it looked abandoned. Flat tire, broken, headlight. But Luke knew better. He rolled the cruiser behind a dumpster and grabbed the binoculars. That's when he saw it. Movement. A curtain in the back window was pulled down, then slowly pushed back into place. Luke's gut twisted. They're in there. Tran was already coordinating backup, but Luke wasn't waiting. He approached slowly, Apollo at his side, hand on his Glock. Every step echoed in the quiet afternoon air. Halfway to the bus, a man stepped. Out from behind the trailer, sunglasses, hat low, hands raised. "Whoa, whoa, easy," he called. "I'm just fixing it." Bus broke down. Luke stopped. "You the driver?" "Yeah." "Volunteer group, church camp." Luke tilted his head. "That right, Apollo was." Growling now. Low. Dangerous. The man took a step back. That's when Luke saw it. The tattoo on the inside of the man's wrist. A black spider coiled around a number. It was Marco. Luke didn't hesitate. On the ground now. But Marco ran. He darted behind the trailer, and Luke gave chase. Apollo barked once, loud and commanding, then launched forward. Marco cleared the first row of parked vehicles, but Apollo was already closing the gap. Luke rounded the corner just in time to see the K9 leap, latching onto Marco's forearm and dragging him to the ground. Marco screamed, kicking wildly. "Get him off! Get him off!" Luke reaching them in. Seconds. "You're done," he said, cuffing the man as Apollo released his grip and stood over him, chest heaving. The bus was unlocked. Inside, 6 children sat huddled together, dazed, silent, terrified. The moment the door opened, a small girl near the front let out a choked sob. "Are you here to help us?" Luke climbed in, heart pounding. "You're safe now." Behind him, Apollo jumped aboard and sat near the front, tail wagging gently as the children looked at him in awe. One boy whispered, "He's a police dog." Luke nodded. "He's the police dog." That night, back at the precinct in McAllen, the kids were placed with child advocates and reunited with families. Marco Vez was booked on federal trafficking charges, DNA evidence, photos, eyewitness statements. It was airtight. There'd be no deals this time. Luke stood outside the holding cell, watching the man who'd haunted so many families now, pacing like a caged animal. "You're not walking away from this," he said. Marco smirked. "You didn't get them all." Luke didn't flinch. "But we got you, and you made one mistake." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You underestimated a dog." At sunrise, Luke drove Apollo to the beach. Just them. No sirens, no paperwork, just peace. They walked the sand quietly, the Gulf breeze, cool on Luke's skin. Apollo ran ahead, splashing in the shallow water, kicking up foam. Luke sat down and pulled out his phone. A message from Tran blinked across the screen. 6 more kids identified, all alive. "Thanks to you, too," he smiled. This wasn't the end, but it was a win. He looked up as Apollo trotted back, soaked and grinning, tail wagging like he just saved the world. And maybe he had. 3 days had passed since Marcos was locked in a concrete cell in McAllen. But Luke Carter couldn't shake the feeling that the case wasn't over. Not even close. Marco had said it with a smirk on his face. You didn't get them all. At the time, Luke had chalked it up to bravado, a last desperate grab for power. But now, Luke was starting to believe it because one of the rescued children, a quiet boy named Toby, hadn't spoken a single word since the bus rescue. Not to the advocates, not to the doctors, not even when his parents flew in from Houston to take him home, except to Apollo. It was late afternoon when Luke stepped into the Children's Crisis Center. The lights were soft, the furniture oversized and cushioned, like everything had been built to feel less clinical, more like a safe home. Kids laughed in the next room. But in the corner, on a beanbag chair, sat Toby, 6 years old, mop of dark curls, shoelaces undone. Apollo lay next to him, still as a statue. The boy's small hand was resting gently on the canine's back, fingers barely moving. like he was drawing invisible shapes in the fur. Luke approached slowly. "Hey there, buddy." Toby didn't look up, didn't flinch, but his fingers paused. "He doesn't talk to anyone," the staffer whispered behind Luke. "But he hasn't. Let that dog out of his sight." Luke crouched next to them. "Can I sit?" A nod. Luke waited. Minutes passed. Then, the boy's lips moved. "He didn't cry," Toby said, voice barely audible. Luke leaned in. "Who didn't cry?" "The boy in the red jacket." Luke's breath caught. There was another child on the bus. Toby nodded, still petting Apollo. "What? It happened to him?" Toby's eyes flicked to Luke, wet, haunted. Then he whispered. "He took the others, but I kept him." Luke's head was spinning before he even reached TR's office. There was another kid. Toby says he was wearing a red jacket. Says he didn't cry. Says he kept him. Tran looked up from her desk. Kept. Him? Where? Luke's jaw clenched. "That's what I'm gonna find out." The footage from the cross station in Laredo, the same one Marco had visited before the bus was spotted, showed more than they realized at first. At timestamp 32 a.m., Marco stood by the bus, but another man appeared briefly in the background, emerging from the shadows to slide open the emergency exit door. He handed something down, a small shape, a child. Then both figures vanished off camera. Luke slammed his fist on the desk. They offloaded him before the raid. Tran played it again, slower. The child in the video had a red jacket. The new suspect was quickly ID'd by facial match. Miguel Elstro Galvan, known associate of Marco, former paramedic. Records tied him to at least 3 clinics that had been mysteriously shut down due to licensing issues. Rumors said he ran an off-the-books recovery shelter somewhere along the border for special deliveries. Translation: high-value trafficking victims, ones who didn't get shipped out with the others. They don't just want to move them, Luke said. They want to keep some. Tran leaned back, exhausted. Where would he hide a kid? Luke didn't miss a beat. Somewhere no one would check. Somewhere no one wants to go. At dawn, they followed up on a series of rural medical supply invoices issued to a place called Refugio de la Paloma, an old hospice clinic outside Del Rio, long closed after a funding scandal. Officially, it didn't exist anymore, but 2 weeks ago, a delivery truck was recorded dropping off crates marked sterile fluids. When Tron and Luke arrived with 2 tactical units, the building looked like it hadn't been touched in years, peeling paint, mold on the walls, and a front gate wrapped in rusted chains. But the chain had been cut recently. Apollo jumped from the cruiser before Luke, opened the door all the way. He was already pulling toward the building. Inside, the place was a tomb. Fluorescent lights flickered above long-abandoned gurneys. Wheelchairs sat in the corners like ghosts. The smell was a mixture of rot, mildew, and bleach. But in the silence, Luke heard something. A faint thump, then another. Apollo barked, twice, then took off down a hallway to the left. Luke followed, weapon drawn. They turned a corner, reached a set of double doors, and paused. Behind it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Luke motioned. The team burst in. The room was padded, walls lined with foam, floor covered in old blankets. On the far side sat a boy, maybe 7, dressed in a red jacket, eyes wide, sunken. In his hands, a plastic action figure, dirty but intact. Beside him, in a folding chair, was Miguel Galvan. He didn't move, didn't even blink. His hands were in his lap, calm, almost peaceful. "I didn't hurt him," Miguel said. "You don't understand. I saved him." Luke approached slowly. Saved him. From what? Miguel looked up. From the ones who want to turn kids into currency. He gestured to the boy. "He's not for sale. Not anymore." Tren cuffed to him without another word. Back at the station, the boy, whose name was Henry, clung to Luke's shirt with quiet desperation. He hadn't spoken much, just nodded or shook his head when questioned. But when Luke tried to leave the room, Henry finally spoke. He was going to sell the others, but not me. He said I was special. Luke's chest tightened. "You are special, Henry, but no one gets to keep you. You get to go home." Henry paused, then whispered, "Will Apollo come with me?" Luke smiled. Apollo goes where the heroes go. That night, Tran knocked on Luke's office door. "Got time for one more twist?" Luke rubbed his temples always. She handed him a folder. We matched Miguel's phone records. There were encrypted. Any messages we decrypted with a forensics tool. Most of it's code, but one thing stands out. She showed him a printed message. "He took the others, but I kept him. He has the mark. We'll need to move soon." Luke read it twice. Same phrase, Toby said. Tran nodded. This goes higher, Luke. Miguel wasn't working alone. He was curating, selecting, stashing. Luke leaned back. They're not just trafficking, they're cataloging. Tran swallowed hard, and I think we just scratched the surface. Later, Luke walked the darkened halls of the station with Apollo. No press, no celebration, just a quiet realization that the enemy was bigger than he thought. Outside, the wind rustled the flag above the precinct. A truck passed by, then silence. Luke looked down at Apollo. You ever feel like we're just plugging holes in a sinking ship? Apollo didn't bark, just stood close. That was answer enough. Luke took a breath. Then we keep plugging until there's nothing left to patch. He opened the cruiser door. Come on, partner. We've got more work to do. The board was full. Names, places, red string, notes in black ink, dates that made your stomach turn. Luke Carter stood in front of the massive corkboard inside the FBI's mobile field unit, parked temporarily outside the Del Rio precinct. All 7 children they'd rescued were safe. And yet, there were more names still on the wall. Some were scratched out with bold red lines, but most still hanging in limbo, still missing. And the only man who knew the full extent of it wouldn't speak. Miguel Galvan had been in federal custody for 4 days now. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't requested food beyond bottled water. He sat in the interview room, staring at the mirrored glass, as if waiting for something or someone. Luke watched through the two-way mirror. Tran stood beside him, arms crossed. He says he's protecting the kids, she said. Claims they're safer if the operation stays in the shadows. The moment we crack it wide open, more kids will disappear. Luke exhaled. That's not how this works. He disagrees. Then, maybe I'll get through to him. Inside the room, Miguel's eyes lifted as Luke entered, Apollo trailing behind and taking a seat near the corner. You brought the dog, Miguel muttered. Of course you did, Luke sat down. You like games, don't you? Twisting truth into logic that makes you feel like the hero. Miguel smiled faintly. Isn't that what you do too? I don't keep children in padded rooms. Silence. Luke opened a folder, laid out 7 photographs, one by one, all of the children they had saved. This is the part where you tell me their names don't matter, that they're safe now, that you did the right thing. Miguel's jaw clenched. I didn't take them, but you helped. He didn't answer. Luke leaned forward. I'm not here to trade barbs. I'm here for the names that aren't on this table yet. The ones who weren't found. The ones you let disappear. Still, Miguel said nothing. Luke dropped one last photo on the table. Not of a child, but of a bracelet. A thin green plastic one with a name etched in faded Sharpie. Anna, age 4. Miguel flinched. Luke saw it. Who took her? What followed over the next 2 hours wasn't a confession. It was a release. A slow, crumbling wall of half-truths, whispers, and broken phrases. But hidden in Miguel's web of cryptic lines was something useful. A location. 3 miles west of Copper Ridge, desert shed. Paint it black, bury. The sign, put a tire on the roof. That's the signal. It was either total nonsense or the kind of coded truth only someone on the inside would know. Luke didn't hesitate. He and Apollo were already halfway to Copper Ridge before the ink was dry on the transcript. The desert outside Copper Ridge was vast. Endless sand, brittle shrubs, and the occasional tire tracks swallowed by dust. The sun beat down with no mercy, and the GPS dropped out 15 minutes into the trail. But Apollo didn't need a signal. He needed a scent. Luke held up the green bracelet. Apollo sniffed once, whined, then barked and tore off into the dust like a bullet fired west. Luke followed, his boots grinding against the gravel. 20 minutes later, they found it. A half-buried shed, roof sagging, one old tire sitting crooked on top exactly as Miguel had described. Luke circled wide, his hand steady on the holster. No fresh tracks, no vehicle nearby. He pushed the creaking door open. The smell rolled out dirt, mildew, stale wood, no lights inside, only silence. In the back corner, behind a false panel, his fingers found a trap door. He forced it open, beam of his flashlight cutting into the dark. There she was. A small blonde girl, curled up on a thin mattress, arms around her knees, a plastic bracelet still on her wrist. Anna. She didn't scream, didn't even move at first. She just blinked at him, slow, uncertain, as if she didn't dare believe he was real. Hey there, Luke whispered, soft as he could. It's over. You're safe. Apollo lowered himself to the floor, creeping forward with careful patience, his eyes gentle. Anna's face changed. She crawled toward him and pressed her cheek into his fur. Her voice was a faint breath. He said no one would ever find me. Luke's jaw tightened. He was wrong. Back in town, Anna was rushed to the hospital, then placed in emergency foster care. Federal agents moved fast. Within hours, Anna's bracelet cracked the case wide open, her abduction linked to a trafficking network stretching into Nevada. Miguel's contact, the ghost in the machine, finally had a name. By dawn, raids were underway. 2 properties stormed, 4 more children rescued, 3 suspects in cuffs. It was unraveling, the ring collapsing under the weight of 1 bracelet and 1 dog that refused to give up. A week later, Luke found himself on a stage at City Hall. Spotlights glaring, applause thundering. He hadn't asked for it, he didn't want it. But Apollo sat proudly at his side, vest gleaming, eyes bright. Reporters fired their cameras. Kids held up painted signs. "Thank you, Apollo, our hero." Luke's gaze drifted through the crowd until it landed on Anna in the front row, clutching a stuffed dog that looked exactly like Apollo. She waved at him shyly. He felt his chest loosen for the first time in years, like he could finally breathe. But as the mayor's speech carried on, Luke noticed something odd. In the sea of parents holding their children, one figure stood apart near the exit. A woman, dark coat, face half hidden, eyes fixed not on the stage, but on Anna. When Luke's eyes met hers, she turned and vanished into the crowd. That night, under a quiet sky thick with stars, Luke and Apollo sat outside the station. The ceremony was over, but his mind wasn't. "Feels different now," Luke said. Apollo wagged his tail. Luke stared into the dark horizon. "Think we're done?" Apollo barked once, sharp, certain. Luke almost smiled. "Yeah, me neither." Because somewhere out there, he knew this fight wasn't finished.